The thunder rolled across the desolate plains of Montana Territory as Nora Vance clutched her infant son to her chest, the tiny bundle wailing against the ferocity of the storm. Her wagon, broken and useless, listed to one side in the mud while rain pelted through the torn canvas covering. It had been 3 days since her husband's fever had taken him, 3 days since she'd watched the light fade from his eyes as he gasped his final breath in her trembling arms. Montana Territory, 1876. The promise of free land and a new beginning had lured them west from Pennsylvania. Now she was alone with a 3-month-old baby boy, miles from any settlement, with winter approaching and supplies dwindling. "Hush now, little James," she whispered, rocking the infant gently. "We'll find our way." But the doubt gnawed at her as surely as hunger pinched at her belly. Morning broke clear and cold, the summer storm leaving behind mud that sucked at Nora's boots as she gathered what she could salvage. Her husband Thomas had been buried beneath a solitary oak tree 2 miles back, the only marker a crude cross fashioned from broken wagon slats. She'd wept until there were no tears left, then continued on, determined to reach the settlement they'd been heading for when sickness struck. She was struggling to secure a bundle of blankets to her back when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Fear clutched at her heart. Stories of bandits and renegades had haunted their journey west. Frantically, she searched for Thomas's rifle, only to remember it had been traded for medicine in the last town they'd passed through. A lone rider crested the hill, silhouetted against the morning sky. Tall and broad-shouldered, he rode with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. As he drew closer, Nora could make out a weather-beaten face beneath the wide brim of his hat. Not young, but not old either, perhaps 35, with lines etched around his eyes that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. "Madam," he called out, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. "Appears you might be in some trouble." Nora straightened, one arm cradling James protectively. "We've had some misfortune, but we're managing," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The man's eyes, the blue of a summer sky, swept over the broken wagon, the meager possessions tied in bundles, and finally to the infant in her arms. "Vincent Xavier," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks just call me Vince." "Nora Vance," she answered, then nodded toward the baby. "And this is James." "Where's your husband, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice gentle. The question, simple and expected as it was, broke through the fragile composure she'd been clinging to. He died 3 days ago. Fever took him quick." Her voice cracked. "He died in my arms." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, recognition of grief, perhaps, or memory of his own losses. He dismounted slowly, as if not to startle her, and approached with his hat in his hands. "Then let me hold what he left behind," the cowboy whispered, extending his hands toward the bundle in her arms. Nora hesitated, instinct making her draw back slightly. This man was a stranger after all. Vincent seemed to understand her reluctance. "I meant no disrespect, madam, just offering to help with the little one while you gather your things. Blackwater Creek settlement's about 15 miles west. I can take you there if you're willing." Relief washed over her, but pride kept her chin up. "I wouldn't want to delay your journey." "No delay," he said simply. "I was heading that way myself." Within an hour, Vincent had salvaged what could be saved from the wagon, secured it to his horse, and fashioned a simple sling for the baby from a spare shirt. Nora watched with cautious gratitude as he handled James with unexpected gentleness, supporting the infant's head with practiced ease. "You have children, Mr. Xavier?" she asked as they began walking, the horse following behind. A shadow passed over his face. "Had a son once," he said quietly. "And a wife. Cholera took them both 6 years ago." "I'm sorry," Nora said, the words inadequate against such loss. Vincent nodded but said nothing more, and they walked in silence for a time, the only sounds the crunch of their boots, the horse's steady breathing, and the occasional whimper from James. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and Nora's pace had slowed, exhaustion and grief taking their toll. Without comment, Vincent guided her to a small copse of trees where a stream trickled through the rocks. "Rest here," he said. "I'll see about something to eat." While Nora nursed James, Vincent disappeared into the brush, returning shortly with a pair of rabbits. With efficient movements, he skinned and cleaned them, then built a small fire. "Been on your own long?" Nora asked as the meat began to cook. Vincent tended the fire, not looking up. "Long enough to get used to it." After a moment, he added, "Wasn't always a drifter. Had a spread near Fort Benton before." Well, before. Nora understood the unfinished thought, before loss changed everything. "Thomas and I were heading to Homestead near Blackwater Creek. His brother has land there." "Good land around those parts," Vincent commented. "Your brother-in-law, he expecting you?" Nora shook her head. "He doesn't know we were coming. It was Thomas's idea to surprise him." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I don't even know exactly where his place is." Vincent handed her a portion of the rabbit, which she ate gratefully. "Blackwater ain't big. Someone will know him." "And if they don't?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Vincent met her eyes. "Then we'll figure something else out." They reached Blackwater Creek late the next afternoon, a collection of weathered buildings nestled in a valley. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and perhaps 20 homes made up the settlement. Dogs barked at their approach, and several curious faces peered from windows and doorways. At the general store, an older man with spectacles greeted them. "Vincent Xavier," he said, extending a hand. "Thought you'd be halfway to Colorado by now." "Change of plans, Harlan," Vincent replied, then introduced Nora. Harlan's face fell at her story. "Thomas Vance, you say? Don't recall anyone by that name hereabouts." "His brother is Benjamin Vance," Nora said, hope dimming. "Thomas said he'd been here about 3 years." Harlan scratched his beard. "Benjamin Vance. Oh, you must mean Ben Vincent. Similar name, easy to confuse." Relief surged through Nora. "Yes, that could be it. Where can I find him?" Harlan and Vincent exchanged a look. "Madam," Harlan said gently, "Ben Vincent left these parts nearly a year ago, sold his claim and headed for California." Nora felt the ground shift beneath her. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Harlan confirmed. "He came into a bit of money when his mother passed, at least that's what he told folks. Said he was going to try his luck in San Francisco." Nora sank onto a nearby chair. James clutched to her chest. Everything, all their plans, their dreams, their last hope collapsed in that moment. "You're welcome to stay at my place tonight, Mrs. Vance," Harlan offered. "My wife would be glad for the company." Vincent, who had been silent, spoke up. "I have a small cabin about 3 miles from town. It ain't much, but there's room enough. You're welcome to stay until you decide what you want to do next." Nora looked up at him, surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Vincent shifted uncomfortably. "Because someone once did the same for me, when I needed it most." That night, in Vincent's sparse but clean cabin, Nora laid James in a makeshift cradle, a drawer lined with soft blankets, and finally allowed herself to weep. For Thomas, for their lost dreams, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. Vincent gave her privacy, sitting outside on the porch, the glow of his pipe occasionally visible through the window. When her tears were spent, Nora joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted, staring into the darkness. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "There's work in town if you're wanting to stay. Harlan mentioned his wife could use help at the store, and there's talk of starting a proper school. Town's growing." "And what about you?" Nora asked. "You said you were headed elsewhere." He tapped his pipe against the porch rail. "Been drifting too long," he said finally. "Might be time to put down roots again." Over the following weeks, Nora found her place in Blackwater Creek. Mrs. Harlan, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Alina, took her under her wing, offering work at the store and introducing her to the townspeople. Most welcomed her warmly, though a few eyed her with suspicion. A young widow with a baby, staying at Vincent Xavier's cabin, sparked inevitable gossip. "Pay them no mind," Alina advised one afternoon as they sorted inventory. "This town's desperate for decent women. Half the men here would court you if they dared." Nora blushed. "I'm not looking for a husband." "Of course not, dear. It's much too soon." Alina gave her a knowing look. "Though I notice Vince has been fixing up that cabin something fierce." It was true. Vincent, who had initially planned to stay only until Nora found her footing, had thrown himself into improving the small homestead. He'd repaired the roof, built proper furniture, and even started clearing land for a spring garden. In the evenings, he would sit with Nora, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence while she mended or nursed James. One night, as snow fell softly outside, Vincent spoke of his wife and son for the first time since their initial meeting. "Sarah was a schoolteacher," he said, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Came west with her brother. I was working as a ranch hand when we met. Never thought a woman like her would look twice at me." A smile touched his lips. "Our boy, David, was just starting to walk when the cholera came." Nora reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "Thomas was a dreamer," she offered in return, "always seeing possibilities others missed. That's what brought us west, the promise of something better." Vincent turned his hand to clasp hers. "And now I need to create something better for James," she said softly, "whatever that may be." As winter deepened, they settled into a routine. Vincent would rise before dawn, tend to the animals, and often ride into town for supplies or to help neighbors. Nora cared for James, kept the cabin, and worked at the store 3 days a week while Alina watched the baby. On Sundays, they attended the simple services held in the schoolhouse, Vincent sitting awkwardly in his cleanest shirt, hat in his hands. It was during the Christmas gathering at the Harlans that Nora first realized how her feelings for Vincent had changed. Watching him bounce James on his knee, the baby's delighted laughter ringing out, something warm unfurled in her chest. It wasn't the passionate love she'd felt for Thomas, but something steadier, deeper, built on shared grief and quiet companionship. The realization frightened her. It felt like betrayal, like forgetting. That night, after putting James to bed, Nora sat by the fire, lost in thought. Vincent entered quietly, shaking snow from his coat. "Cold night," he remarked, warming his hands at the stove. "Vincent," she said suddenly, "I think perhaps I should find a place of my own in town." He turned, surprise evident on his face. "Have I done something to make you uncomfortable?" "No," she said quickly. "It's just, people talk, and I don't want to take advantage of your kindness any longer." Vincent studied her face. "Is that the real reason, Nora?" She looked away. "It wouldn't be proper for us to continue this arrangement, for James's sake if nothing else." "There's another solution," he said quietly. When she didn't respond, he continued, "I've grown fond of you, Nora." "And of James, more than fond." Nora's heart pounded. "Vincent, I'm not asking for what you had with Thomas," he said quickly. "I know that's not possible, but we could make a good life, the three of us, a real home." Tears stung Nora's eyes. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet, it's too soon." Vincent nodded, disappointment clear in his eyes but his voice gentle. "I understand. The offer stands whenever you're ready, if you ever are." A week later, Nora moved into a small room behind the general store. Alina was delighted to have her close, and the arrangement allowed her to work more hours. Vincent continued to visit, bringing wood for her stove and small toys he'd carved for James, but a new formality existed between them. Spring arrived, melting the snow and revealing the mud beneath. With it came a new energy to the town, more settlers arriving, construction beginning on new buildings, including a proper church. And with the new arrivals came a new doctor, a young man named Samuel Porter, who took an immediate interest in the young widow and her son. "He's quite handsome," Alina remarked after Samuel had stopped by the store for the third time that week, ostensibly to purchase supplies. Nora arranged tins on a shelf. "He seems very kind. And educated," Alina added. "From Boston, he says." Samuel was indeed kind, bringing medicine when James developed a cough and offering to teach Nora to read medical texts. He was attentive and proper, everything a woman should want in a potential husband. Yet whenever he called, Nora found herself watching the door, half hoping Vincent would appear. She missed their quiet evenings, the way he listened without judgment, the security she felt in his presence. Vincent, for his part, kept his distance. He'd begun working with the stagecoach company, riding guard on runs between settlements, often gone for days at a time. When in town, he tipped his hat politely when they passed, asked after James, but the easy companionship they'd shared seemed lost. It was a violent thunderstorm in late May that changed everything. The creek that gave the town its name swelled dangerously, threatening homes built too close to its banks. Nora, who had been helping Alina prepare food for the men working to reinforce the embankments, was walking back to her room when she heard the warning shouts. The water was rising faster than anyone had anticipated, already lapping at the base of the general store. Men were running, directing people to higher ground as rain continued to pour. "My baby," Nora cried, rushing toward the room where James was sleeping under the watch of Alina's niece. The girl, barely 16, was frantically trying to gather the baby and his things as water seeped under the door. Nora snatched James up, and they hurried out the back entrance, only to find the path already submerged beneath swift-moving water. "This way," the girl cried, pulling Nora toward higher ground. But as they moved, the bank beneath them suddenly gave way, collapsing into the rushing current. Nora barely had time to thrust James into the girl's arms before she was swept away, the cold water knocking the breath from her lungs. She fought to keep her head above water, but the current was too strong, tumbling her downstream like a rag doll. Through the roar of water and her own panic, she heard someone shouting her name. Then strong arms were around her waist, dragging her toward the shore. She glimpsed Vincent's face, grim with determination, before another surge pushed them both under. When she came to, she was lying on wet ground, a blanket draped over her. Vincent knelt beside her, his face scratched and bleeding, clothes sodden. "James?" she gasped. "Safe," Vincent assured her. "The girl got him to high ground. Doctors checking him now, but he seems fine." Relief flooded through her. "You saved me. Couldn't let you go," he said simply. Something broke inside Nora than the wall she'd built around her heart since Thomas's death. "I've been such a fool," she whispered. Vincent helped her sit up, supporting her with a strong arm. "You needed time, I understood that." "Not just time," she admitted. "I was afraid that loving again meant forgetting Thomas, betraying what we had." "You don't forget," Vincent said quietly. "You just make room for something new." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I'm not afraid anymore." They were married 2 weeks later in the newly completed church, James babbling happily in Alina's arms as they spoke their vows. Samuel Porter attended with good grace, later confiding to Alina that he'd known all along which way the wind was blowing. Vincent used his savings to purchase a proper homestead on the outskirts of town, 50 acres of good grazing land with a view of the mountains. Together, they built a sturdy house with enough room for the family they hoped to have. Nora planted a garden with vegetables and flowers, while Vincent raised horses, quickly developing a reputation for quality stock. Their first daughter, Sarah Elena Xavier, was born the following spring, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. James, now walking and talking, appointed himself her protector, solemnly explaining to visitors that he was the big brother. Life wasn't always easy. Drought came the following year, testing their resolve. A band of rustlers threatened the horse herd. Vincent's old injuries from his years as a ranch hand sometimes left him unable to work for days. But they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from the bond that had grown between them. On the evening of their 5th anniversary, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Vincent and Nora sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Vincent reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't come across your wagon that day?" Nora considered the question. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow." "That some paths are meant to cross," Vincent smiled. "You sound like Thomas now, seeing possibilities." "I learned from both of you," she said softly. "Thomas taught me to dream. You taught me to rebuild when dreams shatter." Inside, James called out in his sleep, and they both listened until his breathing evened out again. Their third child was on the way, another boy according to Nora's intuition, though Vincent insisted it would be a girl with her mother's spirit. "I never thought I'd have this again," Vincent confessed, his voice low. "After Sarah and David died, I was just existing, moving from place to place because staying still hurt too much." "And now?" Nora asked, though she knew the answer. "Now I'm home," he said simply, drawing her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the years that followed, Blackwater Creek grew into a proper town with a railroad station and even a small hotel. The Xavier homestead prospered, their reputation for hospitality as well known as their fine horses. James grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's dreamer spirit, while little Sarah showed her mother's practicality and determination. They were joined by Michael, who arrived exactly as predicted, and later by twins Emma and Elijah, completing their family. On James's 18th birthday, Nora gave him the journal she'd kept since leaving Pennsylvania, detailing their journey west, Thomas's death, and the unexpected love she'd found with Vincent. The final entry, written the night before, reads simply, "Your father died in my arms, but in that ending was the beginning of everything we have now. Life continues, love endures, and sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest losses." James read it with tears in his eyes, then embraced both Nora and Vincent. "I'm proud to carry both your names," he told them, "both your stories." That night, after the celebrations ended and the house grew quiet, Nora and Vincent walked hand in hand under a sky brilliant with stars. They were no longer young silver-threaded Vincent's dark hair, and lines of laughter marked Nora's face, but the bond between them had only deepened with time. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked suddenly. "Coming west, all you lost?" Nora stopped, turning to face the man who had held her through grief and joy, who had helped raise her son as his own, who had built a life with her from the ashes of their separate sorrows. "Never," she said with certainty. "Every step, every loss, every tear led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Vincent gathered her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been on that day by the flooded creek. "Here is where we belong," he agreed, his voice a whisper against her hair. Together, they walked back toward the house they had built, toward the family they had created, their shadows merging into one in the moonlight that bathed the Montana hills in silver.